Yep. Hold on, do I want to do the repair?
Oh, of course. Whenever I'm the vampire, I get this.
Oh my
Dude.
Oh my god.
It just sounds like gunshot. Every time I get vampire. Ooh, vampire! I get someone, but then 15 people come out of nowhere. Stab me! Please, kidnap me!
Zach! When it comes to exploring the world of Roblox horror games, the Vampire Hunters series is undoubtedly one of the most iconic entries. I mean, it's not like there's a whole lot of competition anyways, but regardless, judging these games alone, they're still massively respectable for what they've set out and accomplished. Now, I kind of have mixed opinions on each of these games, which I'll get into, but what I think I have to at least acknowledge is this. These games weren't simply made to just follow a trend and earn easy Robux revenue. They were made with the intent of following what the developer himself wanted to do in order to make his own unique experience. You see, for as long as the Roblox horror genre has been around, the games that were produced by it were more than often dictated by whatever real-world trends were popular at the time. Now, this has become the norm for Roblox front-page games as a whole, but back then it seemed like horror was the genre that was kind of known for appropriating real-world trends, especially in the era of creepypasta and Slenderman. God, if you were around for that, then you definitely know what I'm talking about. It's become increasingly obnoxious in Roblox horror for every game to just be dictated by whatever people like nowadays. Some games are able to pull it off subtly, others, not so much. It's completely understandable, yes, you gotta pay the bills somehow, but it's just gotten to the point where the creativity that once founded the platform has seemed to long since faded. Just countless games that seek to only ride the wave of whatever's trending and be forgotten in a few months. Maybe even weeks, honestly. But in this endless sea of one-hit wonders and copy-paste games, there is gold to be found. By that I mean games that have outlived their respective trends and continued to have stayed afloat due to support from their fan bases, as well as their developers. Although the Vampire Hunters community has been kind of a hit or miss for some people, at least the dev himself seems to actively be in touch with his fan base, and he does a fairly good job at putting out content that they'd appreciate. And that's actually saying a lot when it comes to talking about a Roblox game in modern day. It's not often that a single game can maintain consistent quality on Roblox through the test of time, let alone, 3. Not only is each sequel purposeful in its own way, but the developer was able to understand what attracted people to the games in the first place and how to keep them coming back. If we're being completely honest here, the basic gameplay has pretty much remained the exact same across all 3 games, with each sequel just kind of building onto the foundation. This doesn't immediately mean that the sequel games are uncreative or uninspired though. Each game still serves its purpose by pushing new boundaries while still keeping true to what the fans would enjoy. While the games haven't really hit big numbers in terms of player count in a while, it's worth noting that things have at least stayed mostly consistent. But what made the Vampire Hunter such a success in the first place? Where did things go right? And where did things go wrong? Well, in order to answer these questions, we must start from the beginning. It's the summer of 2014, and Gary's Mod Murder is pretty popular to say the least. Roblox developers took note of this, and as a result, these were the kind of games that were pretty popular to see on the front page. Other than being the game that started it all, the original Vampire Hunters is a pretty simple game in retrospect. It's basically just another Gmod Murder clone, except the murderer takes longer to kill people. And somehow, it just managed to work. Now, I'm pretty sure that we're all aware of the murder format by now. There's a bad guy among us, but we have no idea who it is, and we have to figure out who it is, or else we die. And that's literally all the game is, except it has vampires in it. And people ate that shit up.
Oh, that's hot. That's hot.
Like I said before, Gmod Murder and the whole whodunit thing was kind of on the rise, and I'd also like to include that vampires and edgy stuff like urban fantasy generally kind of just appeal to younger people at the time. Even if the Twilight craze was technically out the door by now, vampires still remained something that a lot of young people generally found interesting in the back of their heads.
So we finally meet.
Alright, but besides that, the reason why this game works so well in terms of structure is because it's basically Gmod Murder, but edgy. Murder Mystery, Twisted Murder, and The Mad Murderer were basically the exact same game, but made by different people, let's admit that. However, Vampire Hunters had more of an edgy style to it that set it apart in presentation from its peers, although the murder structure remained the same underneath with minor tweaks. The biggest gameplay change was that the vampire doesn't instantly kill you, they grab you and drain your health slowly, giving you a chance to struggle and escape their grasp. Getting grabbed also causes you to drop the gun if you were carrying it, so somebody else can pick it up and maybe save you. If they aren't teaming, of course. Small differences like this were the biggest strength of the first game, which is kind of an underlying theme here that I want you to pay attention to as this video goes on. Anyways, this game was a little dated, but I still think it did its job well for its time. Even if the first game gets credit for starting it all, the series didn't really find its identity until the sequels. If your game's only real premise is your favorite game, but with vampires, I'd only imagine that they could only make it so far.
Starting to go a little stale.
So 2015 rolls around and Vampire Hunters 2 is released, and the fans loved it. So much to the point where some of them are still arguing that it's better than the third one. What made VH2 so well liked was the fact that it didn't change what worked in the first game, but it also added new shit that would allow it to form its own identity. Yeah, the basic whodunit structure is the same from before, once again, but now there's stuff like perks, skins, customization, and gear. Interestingly, the game also had its own soundtrack, which is pretty impressive for an indie Roblox game. Around this point was where the series peaked in popularity, with Twisted Murder constantly holding the #1 spot on the front page. It was only logic that fans of the game would surely give VH2 a try. VH2 also introduced a leveling system in which you would unlock new gear and stuff as you progressed. In my opinion, it's kind of a lazy tactic to keep people grinding on the game, but it worked, so who am I to judge? I didn't grind out until level 1 million after all. With all these things considered, I'd still say that this game is more of a stepping stone between the first and the third game. There's a lot of things that don't really seem particularly polished, and I'd still say that the game's flow remains the exact same as the first game 99% of the time. For one thing, all the stuff like vampire perks and survivor gear are locked behind a wall of grinding, and even then they don't really have impact on the gameplay that much. One person with a taser can't kill a vampire, and one person with a pocket knife isn't going to kill a vampire either. Just like in the original, the vampire will almost always die to a gunshot or die because of time running out. Customization was also kind of pointless. In the original game, you played as a character with a unique name and appearance, which was used to keep everybody anonymous. In VH2, you're able to customize your own character and choose your name, which kind of defeats the purpose. I mean, you're playing as the same avatar every game, you're not anonymous. It kind of begs the question as to why we can't just play as our actual player avatars. Not to mention that the customization items are also level locked, so you're gonna have to grind just to make your character look nice. It kind of just seems like another cheap tactic to keep you playing the game. But alas, 11-year-old me didn't see this. I played the game over and over again in the hopes that I'd unlock the taser one day and show those tryhards to his boss. Yeah, I never did that. As much as I played the game and tried to level up, I always had a hard time. From my memory, the grind to simply get the pocket knife felt like an uphill battle. But why? Why was simply surviving against a vampire so difficult? I mean, it's one vampire versus 7 survivors, right? Not so much. At the time that VH2 was running its life cycle, Discord wasn't really that big of a thing yet. However, this game still had its definitive community surrounding it. After all, it was a grindy game. If everybody was playing on the daily, there'd be a pretty good chance that you'd run into the same people every once in a while. Now, I'm just going to be straightforward with you on this one. VH2's community ruined the game for many, many people. And if you have no clue what I'm talking about, then there's a good chance that you might have been part of the problem. By that I mean toxicity. There's a couple of ways to go on about VH2's dumpster fire of a community, and honestly, I'd like to start with a term that every VH2 player has heard a million times. Teaming, or cross-teaming, or whatever you want to call it. Vampires working with survivors and vice versa. You get it. It was generally a massive problem, and it made the game absolute hell to play. I'm pretty sure this game was where young me learned the tactic of server hopping, because it felt like the norm for some of us on the lower end of the social hierarchy. So many servers were filled with teamers to the point where it just felt almost impossible to make it by for a lot of people. Vampire and Hunter are teaming? You're f***ed. Can't use a taser or a pocket knife to kill the vampire because chances are, if you're not teaming, then you're playing alone. And also it takes like 4 pocket knives to kill a vampire without any perks, I'm pretty sure. Can't hide either because all the hiding spots in VH2 are painfully obvious. The only real safe haven for teamers at the time was glitching, something that a lot of people became accustomed to. For example, one rather well-known glitch was the sit glitch, where spamming the sit emote would cause your character to be launched upwards. which was used to get into better hiding spots or jump over map barriers to get outside of the map. Door spamming was also popular, which was the act of spam clicking a door in order to open it and shut it quickly, preventing vampires from getting through. Naturally, all these glitches were patched, but it's just kind of sad that so many people consider them to be the norm. I'm not saying that glitching to attain an unfair advantage is okay, however, when it gets to the point where a decent percentage of your player base has been led to believe that glitching is the only way to not get bullied by teamers, I think it's worth taking note of. Alright, so basically the community kind of just f***ed this game, and the fact that you couldn't do shit about it due to lack of any sort of actual functioning report system was what infuriated so many people. Along with the teamers and the glitchers, many also criticized the game for being semi-pay-to-win. The 2.5 times Detective and Vampire Chance game passes were often used by a group of teamers to basically hold power over a server, as the randoms would never play as anything other than a helpless survivor. Believe me, my 12-year-old self tried to play this game. I swear, I remember hopping on every day in hopes of one day unlocking the taser. But like I said, I just couldn't f***ing do it. Every game was the same. I would always get killed by teammates no matter how well I hid. Once all the glitches got patched, there wasn't really an incentive to play anymore, I'll be honest. I'm just happy to say I unlocked the pocket knife and the morphine. So, 6 years after the release of VH2, the beta for Vampire Hunters 3 drops, and I was pleasantly surprised. Not surprised that the game came out, anybody who snooped in Zacattack's inventory already knew it was up. I was surprised that it turned out so good. The game does a good job at expanding on its predecessor, but I think it accomplishes far more than that. The first two games are pretty much just hide and seek, but the third one straight up describes itself as action PvP horror. Remember before how I said that VH1 and 2 basically function the same in terms of gameplay? Yeah, VH3 is different, thank God. Ironically, this game is the first instance where I feel as if the title is actually appropriate. You're not just a random group of people who are simply trying to survive, you're actually hunting for the vampire. For starters, the gadgets are actually useful now. Yeah, there's still the aspect of one person having a gun, but the survivors aren't exactly helpless anymore. Offensive gadgets are far more powerful than they were in VH2, which establishes a completely different power dynamic than before. The pocket knife, DNA tester, taser, flare, medkit, and morphine see a return from VH2. However, they've all gone through their own respective changes to increase their viability. I think the gadget that has the most drastic transformation was the flare. In VH2 it basically did nothing, but now it's one of the most annoying things to go up against. Everybody in the match, including the hunter and the vampire, are able to equip the two gadgets. Each gadget serves its own purpose and effect in the gameplay, but none of them seem to be particularly overpowered. Basically, gadgets are just there to give everyone a sense of individual power, but teamwork is still the main key here. I'd even argue that VH3 has the highest emphasis on teamwork in the entire series. Staying in a big group isn't a bad idea anymore. Yeah, it puts all the survivors in a single area so the vampire knows where everybody is, but now that everybody has gadgets of their own, they can just gang up on the vampire once they transform.
Fuck your shit. Be racist. You. Ow.
Pretty much all the gadgets work better when used with other people. Like, for example, the weapons. Vampire pulls up to a group of survivors, grabs one guy breaks out, stuns the vampire, everyone just kicks the shit out of the vampire while they're stunned. Most of the weapons are pretty fun to use. The knife is my favorite by far, but I definitely find it satisfying to get a hit with the bat, or block an explosion with the frying pan, or just hold a bitch in place with the taser while you dump an entire magazine into them.
Cut it out! Stop it! I mean it!
It can certainly be said that each offensive gadget is unique, however, it should be known that some are definitely more useful than others. Like, yeah, the bow is cool and all, but in order to get the most use out of it, you can't miss more than once. The taser is extremely good at holding somebody in place, but it doesn't seem to have any use beyond that, and it also breaks after one hit. Meanwhile, you had the extremely versatile knife, which I feel like you always get use out of it no matter what your playstyle is. Things like items or abilities or characters being considered stronger than another isn't inherently a problem in video games. If anything, it's an expected inevitability by now. But what's worth noting here is that you can only equip one offensive gadget, so you're logically inclined to bring whatever you deem the strongest over anything else, or rather, the most useful. Now, in my opinion, it doesn't matter that much because pretty much all the gadgets are either fun or interesting to use, and that's the point of the game, right? To have fun while playing it? Even if I personally think the pocket knife is the best weapon gadget, I'm still gonna play around with all the other ones. Having 2 gadget slots gives way to a shit ton of different combinations to try out, which adds a really nice element of replayability, which in turn kinda leads into my next point of discussion, so let's talk about that. Alright, so if you somehow didn't already know, this game is in beta, therefore all the gear is already unlocked, so you don't have to grind towards it, which actually kind of makes the game more enjoyable. In VH2, most of their replayability was just trying to level up and unlock the gear so you can have fun, but in VH3, I'd actually argue that the majority of the replayability just comes from each match being fun. Playing this game with a group of friends and beating the absolute shit out of the vampire was genuinely hilarious. Even if this doesn't count as critiquing the actual games, as we've learned here, a game's community can certainly impact your interpretation of how enjoyable it is. Even if a large sum of VH3 players are former VH2 players, I'd imagine that all the shitheads have grown up and matured by now. I mean, it has been a whole 6 years by now. There's no way people still act the same way they did when they were kids. Oh wait, some of them still do. But either way, the games are enjoyable just because of how random people are. The defaults are always fun to watch. Having everybody just scramble to fight the vampire in a giant group can be super chaotic sometimes. The game's pretty enjoyable if you don't take things too seriously. The community is just a whole step up from what it seems. Overall, VH3 is a pretty solid game. They could have just made VH2 but with loot boxes and called it a day, but they decided to go the extra mile to create something that's actually pretty unique and enjoyable, and for that I have to give props.
My God!
I like to think that the games and the fans had kind of grown up together. Like, it all started out 7 years ago when we were just playing little simple Roblox games, and we had the preteen years where everybody was stupid, and yeah, now we have VH3, a game that's kind of targeted towards a more mature audience. Considering that this is the final game in the series, I think it's right to say that it's a well-deserved end. Well, you did it, Zach. You managed to hold all of our attention spans for 7 years straight. If you made a Vampire Hunters 4, you know I'd at least give it a try. You've definitely made your mark on Roblox for sure, and probably impacted the minds of countless young, impressionable preteens. That certainly takes patience. And as for VH3, keep up the good work. You're certainly committed and dedicated, and honestly, I can't wait to see how the final product turns out. Also, a little bit ago, there was a glitch with a knife that basically made it a one-hit KO, and I abused the f*** out of it, so thanks for not banning me for it. Did you have a shitty memory of getting bullied by teamers in VH2? Maybe you were one of the teamers in VH2 and you've grown past that phase. Did you remember using any of the glitches that I mentioned? Leave a comment. Tell me your stories. I enjoy reading through all of them. Also, maybe check out some of my other videos. You might like them too. If you want to see more videos like this in the future, consider subscribing, blah blah blah. This isn't the first time I've done a video like this. Oh, and also, join my Discord. We might be able to play a game of VH3 together sometime, who knows. I'm actually thinking about doing some more videos on VH3, like gameplay or funny moments or whatever, depending on how well this video does. I mean, it's a cool game, and I actually do enjoy playing it when I got nothing else to do. If you have any other games that you want me to review, always put them in the comments, because I'm always open to suggestions. Yeah, we got this video out of the way, guys. Like, you know, I just had a lot of things going on in real life. School is still a thing, somehow. I'll see you later. Subscribe, other videos, description, playlist. Bye.
What happened
Okay,
to you?
last round, I got vampire. I got completely with this round. That's vampire. Nobody's in the right now. What the f is happening with me?